We are enrolled in Ball State University's SPCE 611 course with Dr. Felber. We are doing our replication study on speech disfluencies. My name is Haley Phelps.
My name is Natalia Bobek.
I'm Alessandra Altum.
I'm Emanuela Adekola.
My name is Caitlin Dunbar.
The purpose of our study replicates Pollock and Perrin's work on reducing speech disfluencies by using brief habit reversal in their 2020 research article, Reducing Speech Disfluencies During Public Speaking Using Habit Reversal. Caitlin will go next and review our literature articles.
So, as we know, public speaking skills are valuable to students or people in the position of public speaking. However, public speaking skills are also very important for BCBAs. As a BCBA, we'll be interacting with a myriad of different types of people, some who have a concept of behavior analytical articles and information, and others that don't. So the ability to distill all this information into a more digestible concept for everyone is a very, very vital part of being a BCBA. And Ethics Code 8.0 addresses public statements directly. So we chose to replicate a study published in 2020. However, this was actually the fourth replication of an original study published in 2016. So that is where I'm going to start. A 2016 article was published in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis by Mancuso and Miltenberger, which was titled Using Habit Reversal to Decrease Filled Pauses in Public Speaking. Now, this intervention utilized both awareness training and competing response training as a way to decrease these speech disfluencies. And the purpose of the study was to assess if this was indeed effective. During the awareness training portion, the client was made aware of the target behavior and the situations in which they typically occur. So that would occur through reviewing a video recording of the speech and identifying the speech disfluencies of their own. And then the secondary part of competing response practice is where the participant was instructed to take a 3-second pause as a way to combat the speech disfluency. 4 of the 6 participants showed significant improvement after awareness training only, and that is where the recommendation lies for future studies in this original article. And that was actually addressed in the follow-up replication published in 2017 titled Using Awareness Training to Decrease Nervous Habits During Public Speaking by Spieler and Miltenberger. So this article focused on awareness training only, both the video portion and in vivo, rather than utilizing video. However, they chose audio recordings as it fulfilled the same purpose. And during the post-awareness training probes, all of the participants showed a significant decrease in the target behavior. The next study that replicates the original 2016 article was published in 2019, and it was titled Awareness Training Reduces College Students' Speech Disfluencies in Public Speaking. So this article included disfluencies that were not included in the previous studies, which included silent pauses, repetitions of words or phrases, or humming. Now, the results of this study supported the previously reported results of awareness training being a sufficient intervention for speech disfluencies. And 2 of the participants, however, did engage in more silent pauses during the awareness training, which suggests that the competing response may emerge without it being directly taught. Now, the 4th replication of this study, that's the study that we focused on for this project, which was published in 2020 by Pollock and Perrin, again, in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis. This study incorporated both the awareness training as well as the competing response training, which was utilized in the original study. There was a second recommendation in the original study, besides just assessing the efficacy of awareness training alone, and that was to assess the generalization by applying this to a more naturalistic setting. So in the 2017 article, this was addressed to some degree with an audience of 5 being introduced for generalization probes. However, in this study, one of the participants was able to have a generalization probe that included a presentation to 13 students, as well as the instructor and the researcher. So The fifth replication study, so this was published after the study that we chose to focus on, was the came out in 2021. It was published in the spring issue of JABA, and it was titled A Component Analysis of Awareness Training for Reducing Speech. Now, this study differs from prior studies in a very fundamental way. Rather than going with awareness training first, then competing response training second, which is how all the prior studies had done it. Monte et al. Implemented awareness training first for some of the participants, and the remaining participants actually partook in the competing response training first. So the goal of this study was to conduct this component analysis in order to assess which one would be more efficient. However, the goal of reducing the overall intervention time by utilizing only one aspect was not successful, only due to the fact that regardless of subcomponent, the time it took was comparable between 43 and 52 minutes across all participants. So while a decrease in target behavior was seen in both individual subcomponents, this article suggests that a combined awareness training package is more effective than one individual aspect of this intervention. So when we originally started this project, those were the articles. Those were all the 5 articles that were published on this topic. A 6th study, however, was published in fall of 2021. So it was actually very cool to see that the study that we're replicating is still actively currently being replicated by other researchers. And so the study that came out in fall of 2021 was titled Using Brief Habit Reversal and an Interdependent Group Contingency to Reduce Public Speaking Speech Disfluencies. So this study was not only a replication, but a very large extension due to the introduction of the group contingency to the intervention, which personally I find very, very interesting. And this is in hopes of addressing the intensive nature of the intervention, the time and effort involved by ideally utilizing a group and using the same resources needed to improve the self-control of 2 individuals, in this case, to result in improvements for 6 individuals. So, and while this intervention was effective, it was actually unclear if the introduction of the group contingency had statistical significance. Now, a part of this could potentially be due to the fact that participants were not explicitly informed that their progress was dependent upon their team's performance, which personally I believe is a pretty vital part of a group contingency, is to understand how it works. The overall time spent on the intervention was comparable to how much time it would be needed for individual rather than group contingencies. So each group cumulatively took the duration of time that each individual person would need for the intervention. So it didn't really improve the efficiency of it. And the next steps that were put forth in this article, it only consisted of continuing to explore ways to improve effectiveness and promote adoption of BHR for public speaking speech disfluencies. And so it wasn't mentioned in the limitations of this article. Small group size and the intervention's acceptability as per the treatment acceptability rating scale were 2 of the limitations noted. But I really think that the clarification of the group contingency would be a great next step in replicating this particular study. Yeah, so I'm going to now go ahead and pass it off to Emma. Go ahead, Emma.
Thank you, Caitlin. Our group consisted of 5 females, all currently in the master's program for applied behavior analysis at Ball State University. The ages range from 23 to 31 years. We all live in different locations in different states. So due to the geographical time and schedule differences, this research was conducted over the Zoom application. The participant agreed on times to meet by using a sign-off sheet, and everyone wrote dates and times that they could meet up. The materials needed for this study included laptops, computers, or phones. Those were used to record the meetings. We also use stopwatches to time and record the duration of the speeches. A random generator app was used to randomly pick topics that we use for the speeches. We also use papers, pens, or pencils to collect data. I'll pass it on to Haley, who will be talking about the independent variable.
So we had different speech disfluencies, and a speech disfluency can be defined as any instance of filled pauses, tongue clicks, and inappropriate use of the word like that can distract listeners. Filled pauses is defined as any instance where the speaker uses or that does not contain any semantic or grammatical meaning in one speech. An example would be using in the middle of a sentence, and a non-example would be pausing in the middle of a sentence to sneeze. Tongue clicks is defined as any instance of the speaker making a clicking sound produced by placing one's tongue in the roof of their mouth and releasing it to produce a noticeable tick sound that differs from sounds in their language or words. Examples would be making a tick sound in the middle of a sentence or in between two sentences, and a non-example would be imitating a ticking clock. Inappropriate use of the word like is any instance where the speaker uses like to describe an event or an approximation in an grammatically and semantically appropriate way. Examples are referring to a number or feeling, and non-examples are comparing something of the alike or stating to like something. Each instant is counted separately from one another, then combined for a total measurement of speech disfluencies. And now Emma will discuss our data collection and IOA.
I will talk about data collection. So for data collection, we use video recording using Zoom application, and data was collecting using frequency for the 3 forms of speech disfluency that Haley described. Data was collected by writing tally marks for each occurrence of a speech disfluency. IOA data was also taken by rewatching the video and as well taking tally marks for each occurrence of a speech disfluency.
Okay, so for inter-observer agreement was conducted for 60% of the sessions for each participant. So every phase had 5 sessions, and we collected inter-observer agreement for 3 out of the 5 sessions. IOA data was calculated for baseline, post-training, and generalization phases of the research. The IOA was calculated using the total IOA calculation, and it was calculated by dividing the smaller count by the larger count and multiplying by 100 to get the percentage. Data was taken by both the speaker and one of the audience members serving as their partner to calculate the IOA. The speaker collected IOA using recordings. Each participant had their average IOA above 80% in the post-training session, and each participant also had their IOA averages and ranges above 90% in the generalization session. From the table, we can see that Alessandra's average for the baseline was 83.3%, post-training 83.3%, and generalization 100%. Her range was 50% to 100% for both baseline and post-training, and generalization was 100%. Caitlin had an average of 61% in baseline, 100% in post-training, and 100% in generalization. Her range for baseline was 50% to 80%, post-training 100%, generalization 100%. Emma's data shows an average of 71.9% in baseline, 80.6% in post-training, and 100% in generalization. Her range for baseline was 62.5% to 81.8%, 66.7% to 100%, and 100% in generalization. And Haley's data shows an average of 84% for baseline, 93% for post-training, and 100% for generalization. She also had a range of 75 to 95% for baseline, 80 to 100% for post-training, and 100% for generalization. Natalia had an average of 87.3% in her baseline, 81.7% in post-training, 91.6% in generalization, and the range from 83 to 94% in baseline, 71% to 88% in post-training, 75% to 100% in generalization. Procedural fidelity. The data was collected using audio recordings of the sessions. Procedural fidelity data was taken for 25% to 30% of each participant session, just like it was done for the study that we're replicating. In order to calculate procedural fidelity, a task analysis was created to ensure that the steps were being completed accordingly. Some of the things included on the list were making sure to alert the speaker if they had spoken for less than the duration. The total procedural fidelity for each participant was 100%. The procedure for our replication, a combination of video and recordings were used to take data. The audience consisted of 2 to 3 people per session. And despite the participant being aware of the topics that were going to be spoken of before the session, because we had to come up with the topics, the participants were not aware of what they will be speaking on in that session until a few minutes before the session. A multiple baseline across participant design was used for the study, and the phase chain lines were inserted between phases. A new phase began after 5 data points had been taken for the previous session. I'll pass it on to Natalia to talk about the baseline.
Hello, everyone. I will talk about the baseline phase. So for each participant, we utilized a random selector app to choose from 26 different predetermined opinion-based speech topics. All participants pulled their speech topics at random from the same 26 questions, choosing a different topics each time. The topics ranged from examples such as my first vacation with my family, or my first job, or if I were a billionaire. And each participant performed their speech for at least one other group member, and speeches had a minimum length of 3 minutes and a maximum length of 5 minutes. The researcher encouraged the participant to continue had they attempted to end their speech prior to the 3 minute minimum time length. Participants in a replication study were encouraged to not look at a clock at any point in their speech giving process. While observing the participant's speech, the researcher took note of any occurrences of target behavior, which is speech disfluency, filled pauses, tongue clicks, or inappropriate use of the word like, as operational defined by Haley. So as to establish a baseline performance for each individual participant, speeches occurred on a weekly basis until stable baseline data was collected for each participant. Now I want to talk about brief habit reversal phase. So for each participant was familiar with each term and operational definition prior to the baseline. Response detection began with the participant identifying speech disfluencies while listening to the audio recordings of a baseline speech with at least one group member serving as the researcher. The participant was asked to raise her hand when a speech disfluency occurred. If the participant failed to detect a speech disfluency within 3 seconds, the researcher prompted the participant by raising her right hand. After listening to the entire recording, the researcher let the participants know what speech disfluencies were observed. Participants practice identifying speech disfluencies while giving a speech. Procedures for preparing and giving speeches were the same as used during baseline. Participants were reminded to raise their hand when they emit a speech disfluency. Participants continued to present speeches until 100% of speech disfluencies were independently identified in one speech, or 90% in 2 consecutive speeches. Now, next, I want to talk about post-training. During post-training, procedures for selecting topics, preparing, and giving speeches were identical to those used during baseline. The study required boosters after the first post-training session if the participant did not meet the 80% reduction requirement. For our generalization, for the replication study, we maintained the same generalization probe across participants. The procedures were identical to that of the baseline and brief habit reversal. Now I want to pass it on to Alessandra to talk about our results and discussion.
Yes, so we will be showing everyone's graph individually in a moment, but a few things to note first would be that all participants showed variability in baseline, which is common. 2 of the 5 participants actually showed decreasing trends before training, which we'll discuss in limitations later on. However, data was even lower in post-training and generalization. Data was fairly consistent in both post-training and generalization phases across participants, and IOA was conducted frequently between all participants. Lastly, all participants showed a decrease in speech disfluencies overall. So moving on to the graphs, starting with mine, we see that variability in baseline, but the data does even out and show low levels of disfluencies for baseline and generalization. And we see those little asterisks that indicate IOA was taken. Looking at Emma's graph next, we see an immediate decrease from baseline to post-training, and the data stays low into generalization with little variability. Again, those asterisks represent the IOA data taken. Haley is the next graph and was already showing a decreasing trend, but we see it continue to move into lower levels and become more stable in that post-training and generalization phase. This next graph is pretty ideal if you're looking for a functional relationship due to baseline not being too variable, but at a fairly high level. And then we see that immediate decrease to a low level with little to no variability in post-training and generalization phases. The last graph, again, we can see that variability in baseline, which does continue into post-training, but at lower levels. The data does even out generalization and disfluencies stay at a low level. Next, we're going to look at the table of means and ranges, where they are divided into each phase, baseline, post-training, and generalization, where you can see that each participant's data decreased significantly from baseline and the range was much smaller. So you see that most participants were above 10 disfluencies, with the exception of myself, in baseline, and the ranges were quite large. So we see for mine 2 to 15 disfluencies was the range for baseline, 11 to 18, 7 to 14, 15 to 26, and 7 to 19 for baseline phases. But then immediately we see that decrease in post-training from that 6 mean to only 2.2, for Emma 14.4 to 1.8, for Caitlin 10 to 2.2, Natalia 18 to 5.4, Haley 10.6 to 2.4. So that is a significant decrease. And then we can see the same for generalization as well, which is even lower than that post-training. So from 2.2 to 1.8, 1.8 to 2, 2.2 to 0.8, 5.4 to 3.4, and 2.4 to 1.4. And then again, we can see those ranges are a lot smaller as well. So consistency throughout post-training generalization. We'll now hear from Haley, who will discuss the limitations and finish it off with the conclusion.
Prior to starting the replication, we, the participants, were aware of the speech disfluencies that we were trying to avoid. We feel this played a role in having overall low speech disfluencies in our baseline. With that being said, we did see decreases in speech disfluencies in each phase, as Ellie did show. We feel some operational definitions could be modified. For example, some of us resorted to the extended use or overuse of the following terms: because, but, yeah, so yeah. Perhaps these terms could be included in an operational definition for inappropriate use of words and also include the inappropriate use of the word like. Overall, we saw a significant decrease in speech disfluencies, but feel that further research could be conducted in order to eliminate some or all of these limitations in different environments. And here is our references. Thank you.